On the morning of March 15, 1889, the staff at the exclusive Belmont Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, discovered something that would haunt the city's elite for generations. Room 237, reserved indefinitely for one of America's most celebrated socialites, stood eerily empty. The silk curtains remained drawn. The champagne glasses from the previous evening's private gathering were untouched on the marble table, and a half-written letter with no signature lay abandoned on the escritoire. Isabella Fairmont, the woman who had once captivated presidents and princes alike, had vanished into the March fog, leaving behind only the faint trace of French perfume and a mystery that would consume investigators for 40 years. What authorities uncovered in their inquiry would shake the very foundations of high society and reveal secrets so damaging that three powerful families paid handsomely to have the official records sealed. To understand the shockwaves Isabella's disappearance sent through America's most influential circles, it's necessary to go back to where it began. In 1881, Newport society revolved around opulent summer mansions that cost more to build than entire towns. The Gilded Age had forged a new aristocracy of railroad tycoons, steel magnates, and shipping dynasties, and nowhere was their wealth more ostentatiously displayed than along Bellevue Avenue. Among these titans and their carefully curated social circles, Isabella Fairmont reigned supreme. Born Isabella Catherine Aldridge in 1859, she possessed a rare combination of old Boston lineage and new shipping wealth, a mixture that made her irresistible to Newport's social hierarchy. Her father, Cornelius Aldridge, built a shipping empire along the eastern seaboard, while her mother traced her ancestry to one of the original Massachusetts Bay Colony families. Combined with Isabella's striking beauty, raven black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that made Parisian designers take notice, her pedigree secured her position as the undisputed queen of summer society. Her marriage to Theodore Fairmont in 1878 was the social event of the decade. Theodore, heir to a powerful Pennsylvania steel fortune, had the steady, respectable demeanor that balanced Isabella's vivacious charm. Their Newport estate, Rosecliff Manor, boasted 70 rooms, imported Italian marble, and gardens so elaborate they required a staff of 20 to maintain. Isabella's summer parties became legendary, glittering affairs where senators mingled with European nobility, million-dollar business deals were sealed over champagne and caviar, and a single invitation could elevate a family's social standing permanently. The Newport Daily News devoted a weekly column, Mrs. Fairmont's Week, to her charitable work, her fashion, and her guest lists. She supported the arts with genuine passion, funding the city's first proper theater and handpicking European musicians for her soirees. Her influence extended beyond social gatherings. Railroad barons sought her opinion on business matters, politicians courted her favor, and even President Chester Arthur dined at her table in the summer of 1883. Yet beneath this glittering surface, darker currents swirled. Newport's social machinery thrived on rumor, gossip, and scandal. Reputation was everything, and reputations could be destroyed with surgical precision. The first whispers came in the summer of 1884, later remembered by society columnists as the season of shadows. It began innocently enough. Isabella was seen dining alone with Jonathan Pembroke, a young, charismatic architect commissioned to design additions to several Newport mansions. Pembroke, not yet 30, carried a magnetic presence. Tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and intense green eyes that seemed to pierce through society's elaborate facades, he was unlike the usual suitors of Newport's drawing rooms. His previous commissions, a Gothic revival mansion in Pittsburgh and the restoration of a Virginia estate, had established his reputation. But it was his enigmatic charm that set tongues wagging. Their first encounter took place at a Trinity Church Expansion Committee meeting. Witnesses would later describe the unmistakable spark between them, the moment their eyes met across the mahogany table. What began as professional consultation quickly turned into something far more personal and dangerously consuming. Pembroke visited Rosecliff Manor often under the guise of architectural work, and the two would disappear for hours, strolling through the gardens or secluded in Isabella's private study. Though trained to be discreet, the mansion staff noticed the subtle signs. Isabella's laughter carried differently when Pembroke was present. His visits became more frequent. Letters bearing his distinctive handwriting began to arrive regularly. Theodore Fairmont, deeply absorbed in his steel empire and confident in his wife's poise, remained blind to the affair. He admired Pembroke's architectural talent and even praised Isabella for her excellent choice of designer. This ignorance would haunt him later. Newport society, however, was a surveillance network unto itself. By late summer, whispers grew louder. By September, they hardened into certainty. Isabella Fairmont was having an affair. The evidence was circumstantial but damning in a world that tolerated no missteps. She had been seen entering Pembroke's studio on Thames Street, spotted in intimate conversation with him at the casino, their heads bent together in a way that spoke of secrets. Most damaging was the account of Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's maid, who claimed she saw the two in a passionate embrace in a conservatory during a private dinner party. The same elite social machinery that once lifted Isabella to dizzying heights turned against her with mechanical precision. Invitations dwindled, conversations chilled. Newport's intricate social choreography reorganized itself to push her to the margins. Isabella seemed oblivious to the shifting tide. Friends would later describe her as intoxicated, not by alcohol but by the kind of consuming passion that blinds its victim to everything else. She continued seeing Pembroke more openly, almost daring society to confront her. Her defiance accelerated the scandal. On October 12, 1884, it erupted publicly in the worst way imaginable, on the front page of the New York Herald. Under the headline "Newport's Fallen Angel," a society columnist writing as observer laid out the affair with devastating precision. The article's detail suggested an insider's hand. It described Isabella's relationship with Pembroke in damning terms, but the real shock came from what followed. Pembroke, it alleged, was no mere architect caught in a romantic affair. He was a man drowning in gambling debts, with a history of targeting wealthy women in other cities. The piece claimed Isabella had been giving him money, substantial, sums drawn from her personal accounts, and that pieces from the Fairmont art collection had quietly been sold to cover his debts. The revelation struck Theodore Fairmont like a physical blow. His wife had not merely been unfaithful, she had potentially fallen victim to a practiced fortune hunter. The humiliation was compounded by the realization that his business associates, his social peers, and even his household staff had been aware of the affair while he remained in ignorance. The confrontation between Theodore and Isabella took place on the evening of October 13th in the library at Rosecliff Manor. According to Theodore's later testimony to private investigators, Isabella at first denied the affair, but when presented with bank records documenting the transfers, she broke down. She confessed to the relationship, insisting her feelings for Pembroke were sincere and that she had given him the money out of love, not under manipulation. Theodore's response was immediate and merciless. He demanded that Isabella end all contact with Pembroke at once, return to Boston for the winter season, and submit to a period of social rehabilitation that would, in time, allow them to restore their reputation. Isabella's refusal came just as swiftly. She declared her love for Pembroke, called her marriage to Theodore a mistake, and announced her intention to seek a divorce, a scandalous decision that would ruin both of their social standings permanently. Household staff later recounted hearing raised voices echoing through the library until nearly midnight, followed by the sound of slamming doors and Isabella's footsteps climbing the marble staircase. When Theodore appeared the next morning, he bore the hollow-stricken look of a man who had aged a decade overnight. Isabella's defiance carried consequences beyond mere social disgrace. Theodore's investigation into their finances revealed that she had transferred nearly $50,000 to Pembroke over the course of 4 months, an amount equivalent to more than $1 million today. More disturbing still were the findings from Theodore's lawyers regarding the sale of artwork and jewelry Isabella had claimed were routine updates to their collection. Several pieces, including a diamond necklace that had belonged to Theodore's mother, had been sold far below their appraised value, suggesting either catastrophic misjudgment or calculated deception. The final blow came when Theodore's private investigators traced Pembroke's history to Pittsburgh. There they discovered his involvement with the wife of a prominent businessman, from whom he had received large sums before abruptly disappearing when the affair was exposed. In Richmond, investigators uncovered a similar story involving the widow of a tobacco fortune. The report painted a portrait of a practiced confidence man who preyed on wealthy, vulnerable women with surgical precision. When Theodore confronted Isabella with this evidence, her reaction shocked him. Instead of outrage or betrayal, she became fiercely defensive of Pembroke, insisting that his past relationships were irrelevant and that what they shared was real. This unwavering loyalty convinced Theodore that his wife had been drawn so deeply into Pembroke's deception that she could no longer distinguish between reality and the fantasy he had woven around her. By November 1884, Isabella Fairmont's position in Newport society was no longer tenable. The Herald article had been reprinted in papers across the nation, transforming a local scandal into a national spectacle. It had everything readers craved: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and the downfall of a woman they had both idolized and envied. Theodore's ultimatum was clear and absolute. Isabella was to publicly renounce Pembroke, submit to a year of social exile, and accept strict limitations on her finances and movements. In exchange, he would forego divorce and slowly rebuild their standing through charitable work and careful social maneuvering. Isabella's answer was to vanish for 3 days. On November 15th, her personal maid found her staying under an assumed name at a modest boarding house in Providence. When Theodore and his lawyers confronted her there, Isabella presented a plan that was either the act of a desperate woman or a dangerous strategist. She threatened to expose what she described as an extensive network of corruption within Newport's elite. Her affair with Pembroke, she claimed, had given her access to explosive information capable of destroying several of the city's most powerful families. According to Isabella, Pembroke had revealed details of his architectural commissions: hidden rooms, secret passages, concealed safes, designed at the request of clients who intended to hide evidence of illegal business dealings, tax evasion, and other crimes. Her accusations were specific and chilling. She claimed to possess documentation proving that Senator William Blackstone had hidden evidence of bribery behind a false fireplace panel in his library. She alleged that railroad magnate Charles Pionton kept forged land acquisition documents in a secret room beneath his wine cellar. Most explosively, she insisted she held proof that 3 prominent Newport families were engaged in a conspiracy to manipulate steel prices during government contract negotiations. Theodore's lawyers, though skeptical, were alarmed. In the tightly knit, legally ambiguous world of Gilded Age business, accusations of this magnitude could spark investigations that would expose practices many preferred to keep hidden. Even if her claims proved baseless, the mere fact of making them public would cause catastrophic scandal. On November 20th, 1884, in a private dining room at the Belmont Hotel, representatives from 5 of Newport's most powerful families met with Isabella. She laid out her terms with calculated precision: $100,000 in cash, Pembroke's debts quietly settled, and guaranteed safe passage for both of them to Europe, where they would live in permanent exile. In return, she would disappear from American society and take her secrets with her. The negotiations lasted 6 hours. By midnight, an agreement had been reached, though not on Isabella's exact terms. The families would pay and settle Pembroke's debts. But they added conditions. Isabella and Pembroke would travel separately, remain apart for 2 years, and sign legally binding agreements never to return to the United States or contact anyone in Newport society again. Isabella accepted the terms, but witnesses described her as distant during the final moments, detached, almost dreamlike, as though her mind were elsewhere. When asked if she understood the permanence of the exile she had agreed to, she merely smiled and said that some sacrifices were worth making for love. The money was delivered to Isabella's hotel room on November 25th, 1884. Her departure was scheduled for December 2nd, aboard the steamship Britannica sailing from New York. Pembroke had already left for England 3 days earlier on a separate vessel. Everything appeared to be arranged for what would become one of the costliest love stories in American social history. But Isabella Fairmont would never board the Britannica, and the mystery surrounding her final 7 days would torment Newport society for decades. Her last week in America unfolded with an unsettling combination of order and tension. She left her Providence boarding house and returned to Newport, taking a suite at the Belmont Hotel under her maiden name. Symbolically, it was a return to her identity before marriage, before scandal, before exile. Hotel staff described her as calm throughout her stay. She took her meals in her room, received no visitors, and spent most of her time writing letters. William Chen, the young desk clerk, recalled that she mailed at least a dozen envelopes, though he could not remember the addresses. On November 28th, Isabella made an unusual request. She asked the concierge to arrange for a formal photographic portrait. The photographer, Marcus Steinberg, who had recently opened a studio catering to Newport society, later described the session as one of the strangest of his career. Isabella posed for nearly 2 hours, insisting on multiple compositions and lighting adjustments. She paid in cash and waited for the plates to be developed. Steinberg's recollection of Isabella that day was haunting. Though still beautiful, there was something in her eyes, a fierce resolve entwined with deep sorrow. She kept adjusting a ruby brooch she claimed had belonged to her grandmother. When Steinberg casually suggested another sitting after her return from Europe, she smiled faintly and said it would not be necessary. The photographs, discovered decades later during the settlement of Steinberg's estate, show Isabella in formal attire, her hair immaculate, her expression serene yet final. In several images, she appears to look past the camera itself, as though her gaze were fixed on something or someone existing beyond the photographer's studio. On December 1st, Isabella's behavior took on an even more unsettling tone. She hired a carriage and spent the entire day revisiting places in Newport that had once defined her social life. The casino where she had met countless influential figures, Trinity Church where she had exchanged vows, and the cliff walk where she had strolled alongside visiting dignitaries. The carriage driver, Thomas McGillicuddy, later told police that Mrs. Fairmont seemed to be bidding farewell to each location, standing in silence for long stretches at every stop, as if in quiet contemplation. That evening, Isabella returned to the Belmont Hotel and requested a late dinner be brought to her room. Robert Sterling, the hotel's night manager, delivered the meal himself and later recounted how Isabella seemed both agitated and resolute. She had changed from her daytime attire into an elegant evening gown of deep blue silk, and her jewelry, including the ruby brooch from the photography session, glimmered in the lamplight as she moved through the room. She thanked me for the service during her stay, Sterling remembered, and gave me a tip far too generous for the occasion. When I protested, she told me that generosity was one of the few privileges money provided, and she intended to exercise that privilege while she still could. The final confirmed sighting of Isabella Fairmont occurred at around 11:30 p.m. on December 1st, 1889. William Chen, the hotel night clerk, saw her descending the grand staircase dressed in a dark traveling coat, carrying a small leather valise. She moved with deliberate calm, nodding politely to Chen as she crossed the lobby. When he offered assistance with transportation, she declined, explaining that all arrangements had already been made. Chen watched from the hotel's front windows as Isabella stepped out into the cold December night. A thick fog had rolled in from the harbor, and within moments her figure dissolved into the pale gray mist that often shrouded Newport on winter evenings. It was the last time anyone ever saw Isabella Fairmont alive. When she failed to appear for her scheduled departure on the Britannica the next morning, Theodore Fairmont contacted the police. The ensuing investigation uncovered a labyrinth of secrets, deception, and unanswered questions that would perplex law enforcement for decades. The Newport Police Department had never encountered a missing persons case quite like Isabella's. In 1889, such investigations relied heavily on witness testimony, physical evidence, and the emerging discipline of methodical detective work. Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, a meticulous man seasoned by waterfront crimes and domestic disputes, approached the Fairmont case with the thoroughness that would come to define modern policing. The first phase of the investigation centered on Isabella's movements during her final week in Newport. Harrison's team interviewed hotel staff, carriage drivers, shopkeepers, and anyone who might have seen her. What emerged was a portrait of a woman deliberately closing the chapters of her life, as though preparing for a journey from which she did not plan to return. The contents of Isabella's hotel room provided crucial clues. Her belongings were arranged neatly, suggesting either careful planning or a calm departure. More curious was what was missing. Several valuable pieces of jewelry, including a diamond bracelet seen earlier in the week, had vanished. Among her personal papers were drafts of letters that seemed to be farewells to family members, though no finalized versions were ever recovered. The most puzzling evidence was a partially burned document in the fireplace. Surviving fragments contained financial calculations and several names, including JP, presumed to refer to Jonathan Pembroke, and WB, which investigators eventually linked to William Blackstone, the Senator Isabella had allegedly threatened to expose. The investigation took a darker turn when Harrison attempted to contact Pembroke in London. The address provided to Isabella's lawyers led only to a mail forwarding service, and Pembroke himself had seemingly disappeared. British authorities reported no record of anyone matching his description in any of London's major hotels or boarding houses. This led Harrison to a grim realization. Either Pembroke had been operating under a false identity, or he had never left for Europe at all. Shipping records confirmed that a Jonathan Pembroke had booked passage to London, but the manifest revealed that he never boarded the vessel. Digging deeper, Harrison uncovered troubling details about Pembroke's past. While his architectural credentials appeared impressive, they were difficult to fully verify. His previous work in Pittsburgh and Richmond was genuine, but in both cities he had abruptly abandoned projects, leaving behind unpaid debts and unanswered questions. Even more alarming was the recurring pattern of romantic entanglements with wealthy women. The most chilling revelation came when Harrison's team inspected the architectural modifications Pembroke had made to several Newport mansions. Working with local inspectors, they confirmed that at least 3 homes featured hidden compartments and secret passages, exactly as Isabella had described. Even more telling, these alterations were completed months before her affair with Pembroke became public, suggesting that his involvement with her may have been calculated from the beginning. The case shifted direction when Harrison received an unexpected visit from Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an elderly seamstress who had worked for several prominent Newport families. She claimed to have information about Isabella's disappearance but insisted on confidentiality. Her account was both riveting and chilling. She explained that on the night of December 1st, while working late at the sewing room of the Peaton mansion, she overheard voices outside. Curious, she peered through a window overlooking the rear courtyard and saw Isabella Fairmont meeting with 2 unknown men. The conversation appeared heated. Isabella gestured emphatically while the men stood still and silent. After about 20 minutes, one of the men handed her what seemed to be an envelope or small package. She then left with them in a closed carriage. Mrs. Winthrop's statement was compelling yet imperfect. She could not provide detailed descriptions due to poor lighting and her limited vantage point, and her personal reputation was tainted by previous dismissals for gossip. Harrison was prepared to dismiss her testimony until she mentioned one detail that no outsider could have known. Isabella had been wearing the ruby brooch, and the moonlight had caught its surface in a distinctive way. Just when it seemed the mystery could grow no darker, the financial investigation deepened the case. Federal agents discovered money transfers involving the 5 Newport families tied to Isabella's exile agreement. The $100,000 intended to fund her departure to Europe had been transferred to a New York bank account opened under the name I.C. Aldrich, her maiden name and initials. Yet the account had never been accessed. The funds remained untouched, and the documents used to open the account were forged. Handwriting analysis confirmed the signature did not match Isabella's distinctive script, suggesting that someone else had set the trap long before she disappeared into the fog. This discovery led Harrison to a chilling realization. Someone had been impersonating Isabella during the final negotiations, or the entire exile agreement had been a carefully orchestrated deception meant to mask a far more sinister plot. The urgency of the investigation intensified when Harrison uncovered the truth about Jonathan Pembroke. He hadn't vanished at all. He had been found dead in a Boston boarding house on November 30th, the day before Isabella disappeared. Although the official cause of death was recorded as heart failure, the boarding housekeeper revealed that Pembroke had been visited earlier that day by 2 well-dressed men. They claimed to be business associates, spent several hours in his room, and then departed without drawing attention. Pembroke's death had been reported in Boston newspapers, but the news hadn't reached Newport until several days later. This timing indicated that Isabella likely had no knowledge of his death when she made her final arrangements on December 1st. If she had intended to meet Pembroke or join him in exile, she had unknowingly been walking into a trap. Harrison shifted his focus to identifying the two men who had visited Pembroke and whom Mrs. Winthrop claimed to have seen with Isabella on the night of her disappearance. The key breakthrough came when he discovered that several prominent Newport families involved in the scandal had hired the same private security firm, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, to handle delicate matters tied to Isabella. Through legal pressure applied by federal investigators, Harrison obtained access to Pinkerton files. What they revealed was nothing short of a conspiracy. Agents had been monitoring Isabella and Pembroke for weeks, meticulously tracking their movements and communications. Even more disturbing were the strategic recommendations in the reports. They described Isabella as a significant liability to the families involved and suggested that a permanent resolution might be necessary. The language of the Pinkerton reports was deliberately vague, yet unmistakably sinister. Terms like neutralizing the threat and ensuring permanent discretion hinted at plans that went far beyond surveillance. One particularly damning report dated November 28th recommended immediate action to prevent exposure, noting that the target's emotional instability provides optimal cover for various outcomes. The most shocking discovery emerged when Harrison examined Pembroke's original architectural plans for the hidden compartments he had installed in several Newport mansions. The blueprints contained detailed specifications for a concealed chamber beneath the wine cellar of the Piton mansion, an enclosed space large enough to hold far more than documents or valuables. With support from federal investigators and local building inspectors, Harrison secured a warrant to search the Piton estate. What they found on February 14, 1890, would scar every member of the investigative team for the rest of their lives. The search began at dawn on Valentine's Day. Detective Harrison led a team consisting of federal agents, Newport police, and a structural specialist. Charles Piton, the mansion's current resident, had already departed for his New York home after the warrant was issued, leaving behind a house preserved in quiet opulence. The wine cellar beneath the main floor initially appeared ordinary. Racks of imported wines lined the walls, and the stone floor bore no obvious sign of disturbance. But measurements quickly revealed something troubling. The cellar's dimensions did not match official plans filed with the city. Approximately 8 feet of space was unaccounted for behind the north wall. With deliberate precision, investigators used picks and crowbars to dismantle what proved to be a false wall built from the same stone as the original structure. Behind it lay a hidden chamber roughly 10 feet square and 8 feet high, its walls lined with lead sheeting, a construction choice designed to muffle any sound from escaping to the upper floors. The chamber was not empty. In the far corner, wrapped in the remnants of an elegant silk evening cloak, lay the remains of Isabella Fairmont. The ruby brooch noted by hotel staff and photographer Marcus Steinberg was still fastened to the decaying fabric. Though 2 months had passed since her disappearance, the condition of the body and surrounding evidence revealed the grim truth. The coroner determined that Isabella had died from chloral hydrate poisoning, a method increasingly favored by professional killers because it was difficult to detect and easy to administer without the victim's knowledge. The poison had been mixed with champagne, traces of which were found in a crystal glass near her body. Yet the most horrifying detail lay in the scratch marks etched into the lead-lined walls. Isabella had not died immediately. She had been conscious when locked inside, struggling to escape as the poison slowly overtook her. Clutched in her hand was a partially written note containing what appeared to be accusations against her killers, though time and decay had rendered most of it illegible. The discovery transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into one of the most chilling murder inquiries Newport had ever faced. The evidence painted a picture of deliberate, premeditated murder masked as scandal management. The exile agreement had been nothing more than a smokescreen. The 2 men who met Isabella on the night of December 1st were identified as Pinkerton agents, acting on behalf of Newport's elite families who feared her revelations. Isabella had been lured to the Piton mansion under the pretense of finalizing her departure to Europe. Instead, she was drugged, locked in the soundproof chamber, and left to die. The lead lining supposedly installed to secure valuables. was in fact part of a carefully designed execution chamber. Harrison's team uncovered that Jonathan Pembroke's death, too, had been a carefully timed murder disguised as natural causes. As the architect responsible for the secret rooms, Pembroke knew too much. He would have been a dangerous witness if Isabella's accusations ever saw the light of day. His death was timed precisely to precede Isabella's, ensuring she would never learn the truth before walking into the trap. The arrests that followed the discovery of Isabella's body sent shockwaves through the highest tiers of American society. Charles Peyton, William Blackstone, and 3 other prominent Newport figures were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. 2 Pinkerton agents faced charges of murder and evidence concealment, but the anticipated trial that might have exposed the full conspiracy never came to fruition. Within weeks of the arrests, the case began to unravel. Key witnesses, including Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, recanted their testimony or claimed to have been mistaken. Critical evidence vanished from police custody under circumstances that pointed to corruption. Even worse, the Pinkerton Agency's Boston office housing files related to the case was consumed by a suspicious fire. The once forceful federal investigation became mired in jurisdictional disputes and bureaucratic delays. Investigators were reassigned, warrants challenged, and court time consumed by endless procedural motions. It became increasingly clear that powerful interests were working relentlessly to bury the truth. The final blow came when Theodore Fairmont, Isabella's widowed husband, publicly announced that he was withdrawing his cooperation. Through a statement issued by his lawyers, Theodore declared that he had endured enough tragedy and wished to allow his wife to rest in peace without further public spectacle. With that, the case that had begun with a woman disappearing into the winter fog of Newport was systematically smothered by the very power and privilege she had threatened to expose. Behind this public statement lay a private agreement that investigators would later uncover through meticulous examination of financial records. Theodore had been offered substantial compensation for his steel company's government contracts, along with guarantees of social rehabilitation and long-term financial security. In exchange, he agreed to withdraw all cooperation with the murder investigation and publicly support the narrative that Isabella had taken her own life after becoming despondent about her impending exile. The criminal cases against the Newport conspirators collapsed in the fall of 1890. Charles Peyton was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. William Blackstone's case was dismissed on procedural grounds. The Pinkerton agents disappeared altogether, presumably relocated under new identities and generously compensated for their silence. Isabella Fairmont was officially buried in the family plot at Newport's Island Cemetery on October 15, 1890. The funeral was a small, private event attended by fewer than 20 people. No society columnist reported on the service, and no newspapers published obituaries recounting her life or accomplishments. Yet Isabella's murder did not vanish with her burial or the collapse of the criminal cases against those responsible. In the years that followed, a different form of justice began to unfold, one that suggested her accusations had been entirely justified. The powerful families who had orchestrated her death believed they had successfully buried their secrets along with her body, but the very corruption and criminal activities she had threatened to expose became the seeds of their downfall. Charles Peyton, in whose mansion Isabella had died, never recovered from the psychological burden of her murder. Friends and family described how he grew increasingly paranoid and reclusive, convinced that Isabella's ghost haunted the halls of his home. He eventually abandoned the Newport estate for his New York residence, but found no peace there either. His business empire, built on fraudulent government contracts Isabella had uncovered, began to crumble when federal investigators, acting independently of the murder case, exposed systematic bid rigging and price manipulation. By 1895, Peyton Steel Company was facing bankruptcy proceedings and federal prosecution for fraud. The hidden documents Isabella had threatened to reveal were discovered during asset seizure proceedings, confirming every claim she had made. Peyton himself died in 1897, found lifeless in his New York mansion under circumstances that suggested suicide, though the official cause of death was listed as heart failure. Senator William Blackstone's political career suffered a parallel decline. In 1892, A corruption investigation unrelated to Isabella's murder uncovered the very bribery evidence she had said was hidden behind his library fireplace. Documents seized during a federal raid revealed a systematic scheme to sell Senate votes on railroad legislation. Blackstone was expelled from the Senate in disgrace and died in poverty in 1899, his fortune consumed by legal fees and restitution payments. The same pattern unfolded among other conspirators. Railroad magnate Thomas Hartwell was ruined when the Interstate Commerce Commission exposed the price-fixing conspiracy Isabella had been prepared to unveil. His suicide in 1896 made national headlines. Banking heir Robert Sterling lost his fortune in the Panic of 1893, as his illegal lending practices, those Isabella had discovered, left his institution dangerously exposed when the economy collapsed. Even the Pinkerton Detective Agency, which had carried out Isabella's murder, met its reckoning. As labor unrest escalated through the 1890s, the agency came under intense federal scrutiny. Congressional investigations revealed a pattern of corruption, illegal surveillance, and violent operations that permanently destroyed its reputation. By 1900, Pinkerton had lost most of its major clients and was facing criminal charges in multiple states. Detective Samuel Harrison, who had led the original investigation into Isabella's disappearance, never forgot the case that defined his career. After retiring from the Newport Police Department in 1905, he devoted his remaining years to compiling an exhaustive record of everything he had learned. His private files, discovered after his death in 1918, contained evidence linking several other mysterious Newport deaths during the 1880s and 1890s to the same network of wealthy families and corrupt officials. Harrison's final report, completed in 1917, ended with a chilling conclusion. The murder of Isabella Fairmont was not an isolated crime, but part of a deliberate campaign by America's wealthiest families to eliminate threats to their power through violence and intimidation. The failure to prosecute her killers sent a dangerous message that wealth and influence could place individuals above the law. The case of Isabella Fairmont became a cautionary tale, whispered among Newport's elite for decades. Parents warned their daughters about the perils of ambition and illicit affairs. But the deeper truth of her story, that the Gilded Age elite were capable of murder to protect their interests, remained a shadow that lingered over the town. The Peaton Mansion, where Isabella had met her end, remained empty for over 20 years after Charles Peaton's death. Local residents reported strange occurrences: lights glowing in the mansion's windows despite its vacancy, sounds of music and laughter drifting across the grounds on winter nights, and the persistent scent of French perfume in sealed rooms. In 1920, the mansion was purchased by a Catholic charity and converted into an orphanage, but its haunted reputation endured. Children claimed to see an elegantly dressed woman wandering the corridors at night, and staff reported hearing scratching sounds from the basement walls. The orphanage closed in 1935 after a string of unexplained accidents that church officials deemed incompatible with the children's welfare. When the building was demolished in 1938, construction workers discovered additional hidden chambers unknown to the original police investigation. One contained personal belongings believed to have belonged to other missing persons from the 1880s and 1890s evidence, suggesting Isabella was not the conspiracy's only victim. The ruby brooch Isabella had worn on the night of her death became the subject of its own dark legend. After being held as evidence for years, it was returned to Theodore Fairmont, who donated it to a Boston museum. The brooch vanished from the collection in 1895 under suspicious circumstances, later resurfacing periodically, each time tied to tragedy. In 1902, it was found among the possessions of a New York socialite who died in an apparent suicide. In 1918, it was discovered in the jewelry box of a Philadelphia heiress who died mysteriously during the influenza pandemic. Each owner met a fate eerily similar to Isabella's. Theodore Fairmont never remarried. He lived quietly in Boston until his death in 1923, dedicating his later years to philanthropic work focused on protecting women from domestic violence. His will established a substantial endowment for a foundation devoted to investigating unsolved crimes against women, though he never publicly mentioned Isabella's murder. The Fairmont Foundation funded investigations into dozens of suspicious deaths involving wealthy families throughout New England. Though it never solved a case as infamous as Isabella's, it helped expose a pattern of violence against women that had long been ignored by law enforcement more intent on shielding the powerful than defending the vulnerable. Perhaps the greatest mystery surrounding Isabella Fairmont's death was not who killed her, nor why, but what became of the evidence she had collected. Despite extensive searches of her hotel room, her personal belongings, and every location she had visited in her final week, investigators never located the documents she claimed to possess. Detective Harrison believed Isabella had hidden them somewhere in Newport. Aware of the danger she faced and determined to ensure her allegations would outlive her, in 1954, renovations at the Belmont Hotel uncovered a sealed envelope hidden behind a loose brick in the basement storage area. The envelope, marked with Isabella's initials and dated November 30, 1889, contained the missing evidence: detailed financial records, correspondence between Newport's elite and corrupt officials, and architectural blueprints revealing the locations of hidden compartments in more than a dozen mansions. The discovery of Isabella's evidence 65 years after her death offered the final and irrefutable confirmation of every allegation she had ever made. The documents exposed a far-reaching conspiracy that extended well beyond Newport, implicating politicians, judges, and influential business leaders throughout New England. Yet by 1954, all those originally involved were long deceased, and the statute of limitations had long since expired on their crimes. The Belmont Hotel turned Isabella's recovered documents over to the Newport Historical Society, where they remain today as part of a permanent exhibition exploring the darker, hidden aspects of Gilded Age society. Many visitors to the exhibition report feeling an inexplicable chill when standing before Isabella's final photographs or reading her last letters, as though her presence lingers, determined to ensure that her story is fully and truthfully told at last. The hotel room where Isabella spent her final nights, room 237, was eventually repurposed, but the unsettling occurrences persisted. Staff and guests claimed to smell French perfume, hear the sound of a woman weeping softly, and sense an unshakable feeling of being watched. In time, the hotel's management removed the room number entirely and converted the space to storage, but the strange phenomena continued unabated. Dr. Margaret Steinberg, a historian who spent 2 decades investigating Isabella Fairmont's case, published the definitive account of the conspiracy in 1979. Her book, The Newport Murders: Wealth, Power, and Justice in Gilded Age America, became a bestseller and reignited public fascination with the case. Steinberg's research confirmed what many had long suspected. Isabella's murder was part of a broader, systematic pattern of violence employed by America's elite to protect their interests. Her murder was not a crime of passion, Dr. Steinberg concluded, but a calculated business decision carried out by men who regarded human life as just another commodity, something to be bought, sold, or eliminated as circumstances required. Interest in Isabella Fairmont's story persisted well into the 21st century. In 2019, the FBI's Cold Case Unit announced plans to re-examine the physical evidence using modern forensic techniques. While they acknowledged that the destruction of records and the passage of time made any prosecution impossible, the renewed investigation underscored the case's enduring significance. For many who have studied Isabella's story, legal justice is no longer the central question. Instead, the case stands as a stark lesson about power, corruption, and the personal cost of challenging entrenched interests. Her death became emblematic of the lengths to which America's wealthiest were willing to go to protect their privilege, and a lasting warning about the danger faced by those who threaten to expose inconvenient truths. This story serves as a reminder that some secrets are so dangerous that the powerful will kill to keep them hidden, and that justice delayed can mean justice denied forever. The wealthy families who orchestrated Isabella Fairmont's murder may have escaped the courtroom, but they did not escape the corrosive consequences of their own corruption. One by one, they were ultimately undone by the same greed and moral rot they used to destroy others. What do you make of this story? Do you believe every secret has now been unearthed, or are more still buried deep within Newport's opulent mansions? Isabella Fairmont's defiance in the face of immense power cost her everything, but her sacrifice ensured that their crimes would not remain hidden forever. If you found this story compelling, leave your thoughts on what you believe truly happened on Isabella's final night in Newport. And if you want more unsettling stories about the hidden darkness behind America's elite, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who loves historical mysteries. The truth has a way of resurfacing, no matter how determined the powerful are to bury it.